introduces something called a hard currency. But then the banker realized that if I have 100 ounces of gold and I issue in one receipt for each ounce of gold, I could only issue 100 receipts. Well, let me call it a check now. A banker's check. But the banker do 2 and 2 and he make 22. Yeah. You say I could give them a 6 for 9, they wouldn't know it. Instead of issuing 100 checks, 100 bank draft, 100 currency notes, he issued 200. So he make 100 coins, 100 ounces of gold out of thin air. Yeah. He created money out of nothing. And so long as the people were prepared to accept that paper and use it for transactions, it became halal. And so Britain reinforced its status as the ruling state in the world through the creation of the sterling pound in the form of currency now. Another very strange thing happened when Britain became the ruling state in the world. Britain became the money lender of the world. You can't be the ruling state without being the money lender. So Shylock is now in charge. And Britain lending money left, right, and center. Everybody ended up in London to borrow. And when they borrow, it's not the gold they're getting, it's the paper. And they had to pay interest. But what about the world of Islam? We were not supposed to borrow on interest. Haram. Allah prohibited it. Sheikh Ali Mustafa just recited the Quran, in which it was stated very emphatically that this is prohibited. And in the next 2 sessions, we will address the subject of why. Why was it prohibited for money to be borrowed or lent on interest? Why? The Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, warned. He said, I leave behind me 2 things, so long as you hold on to them, you'll never go astray. The book of Allah and my sunnah. In the book of Allah it was prohibited, and in the sunnah, namely the example or the way of the Prophet, it was prohibited. In fact, he cursed. He cursed all 4, and he said they're all equally guilty, the one who takes riba. So if you had ever put your money in a fixed deposit and you ever took the interest, now your heart will be shaking. And he cursed the one who gave riba. So if ever you borrowed money on interest and you were paying the mortgage, your heart should be shaking and shivering now. Because Muhammad ﷺ cursed you. I don't know what to do more. I can't raise my voice more than that to get people to wake up. I don't know. The one who records the transaction, he cursed him. And the 2 witnesses, he cursed him. And he said they're all equally guilty. And so which Muslim will go and borrow money on interest? But he warned. He said that you, addressing the Muslim, he said, you go do it. You're going to follow those who came before you, that Jamaat. You will follow them, you will abandon me and follow them. Step by step, every single step that they take, you will take. To such an extent that if they were to go down into a lizard's hole, you will go down into a lizard's hole as well. So they went down into the lizard's hole because Europe is now the money lender of the world, in which Britain is the prince. Guess what the Muslims did? Not the ordinary people, the Khalifa, the government. in Istanbul, the Ottoman Islamic government, they started borrowing money on interest from the European bankers, from the British bankers. The Jews controlled the money market in London. The Jews controlled the Bank of England, which was not a public institution, it was a private institution, like the, what is it called in the United States? What is it called in the United States? The Federal Reserve Bank. It's not a public institution, it's a privately owned institution. Guess who owns it? Guess who controls it? The Jews. And so we started borrowing money on interest. And from the time you start borrowing on interest, they have you in the palm of your hand. Because when you can't pay back the loan, then it's blackmail time. And you have to vote like this in the UN. When the Khalifa or the Caliph or the leader of the Muslims could not meet his payments, then the bankers in London put the pressure on him. Okay, we'll give you a rescheduling of your debt, it's called, on the condition that you agree to abandon Islam. What did they want us to abandon? Something called jizya and something called Ahlul Dhimma. You have in front of you the book entitled The Prohibition of Riba in the Quran and Sunnah, and you'll read that story in the book, not now when you go home. And so Britain was now in a position to actually force upon the world of Islam a betrayal of the Quran and Sunnah. And I'm talking about the 19th century, 200 years ago. Not now, 200 years ago. That was the power of money at that time. What is the power of money today? Because we borrowed on interest, and because we allowed Britain, through their Bank of England, to create paper money in excess of the gold that they had, and to now start using it to lend it on interest. Massa Day ain't done. That's where Massa started, with stage one, with Britain and the sterling pound. But then came stage two, and you will find much of the material I'm presenting now in my lecture. The CD is there, the DVD is there on Dajjal, the false messiah, and another lecture which is there, Islam and the International Monetary System. I'm giving you a summary of it now. A strange event took place, with Massa moving from one headquarters to a second headquarters. And the United States replaced Britain as the ruling state in the world. And I ask of you, if you never asked the question before, why don't you ask it today? Is this happening by accident? Or is this part of a plan? If you think this is happening by accident, you should buy a one-way ticket to Hollywood. No, it is part of a plan. In stage two, Britain no longer has the military might, because the First World War was forced upon Britain by virtue of an act of terrorism which has the same fingerprints as September the 11th. Same fingerprints as September the 11th. That act of terrorism was in the summer of 1914, the assassination of the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand. Assassinated in, anybody? Where? Sarajevo. And the fingerprints or the footprints that were manufactured, of course, led to Russia. And so Austria-Hungary had to declare war on Russia. And then Britain and France, which were in military alliance with Russia, that had to be put in place before. Like you had to put Musharraf in Islamabad before you could have September 11th. So Britain and France had to declare war on Russia. And then Germany normally had to come, naturally had to come to the help of Austria-Hungary, because they have the same racial affinity. And then you had to push the Ottoman Islamic Empire into the war. Push it, because they didn't want to go into war. And so they were pushed. And what happened in that war was that Germany unleashed a new weapon of war never used before in war. What was it? What was it? What was it? Submarine. The submarine. U-boats. And by virtue of the effective use of the submarine, Germany was able to maroon Britain. Meaning, you couldn't ship out and you couldn't ship in. You were trapped in the island. And eventually Britain was facing starvation. It was at that point in time that the Jews went to Britain. This was all pre-planned, like after September 11, but is now unraveling in the world, unfolding in the world. And they said to Britain, you're going to lose this war? Britain said, yeah, we're going to lose this war. They said to Britain, well, we could help you. We can help you win the war. We can bring the United States into the war if you will promise to give us the Holy Land. Britain said, deal. But how are you going to do it? You never hear about a man named Henry Ford? The most popular man in the United States? His book is there. We have it there. The International Jew. And they went to work, and to be able to climb over Henry Ford's head. And they went to work to be able to rebuild public opinion in the United States in favor of intervention in the war. Until they succeeded. And if you want to read that story, it's there in that book. And the United States entered into the war. And Britain won the war. Had the United States not intervened, Britain would have lost the war. So it's plain and clear now that Britain is no longer the ruling state in the world. The United States of America has arrived and is now replacing Britain as the ruling state in the world. If there was any doubt about the status of the United States as the ruling state in the world, all the doubts were dispelled in 1956. What happened in 1956? There was a revolution in Egypt in 52, correct? MashaAllah, we have some bright people here. Suez Canal. There was a revolution in Egypt in 1952 and the king was removed. What was the king's name? Farouk. And General Muhammad Naguib became the new president. And he remained in power from 52 to 56. And in 56, who took over from him? Jamal Abdel Nasser. And when he took over, he nationalized the Suez Canal. You remember that? Or you were not born as yet? He nationalized the Suez Canal. And Britain and France and Israel in tandem retaliated by attacking Egypt and taking back the Suez Canal. And Israeli troops landed at the Suez Canal. And guess what the United States did? At that time, there was a general in power as the president, and the United States had not as yet been hijacked. His name was Eisenhower. He informed Britain, get out. And the British lion had to put his tail between his leg and get out. And the British government fell. Anthony Eden was prime minister. He had to resign. And so it was plain and clear when Britain had to withdraw from Suez, and France and Israel, that the United States is now the new ruling state in the world. Massa has now reached stage 2. Is this happening by accident? The United States has overwhelming military superiority over the rest of the world. It was made manifest in a very dramatic way in